Blake Moore helped create Utah Redistricting Commission. He says it's gone beyond original goal. Representative Moore has long believed in redistricting reform. He wrote about the concept while in graduate school, and he was inspired by Ronald Reagan's support to establish commissions to draw states' congressional boundaries. It was those beliefs that inspired Moore to get involved with Better Boundaries in 2017, before he was elected to Congress, to create an independent redistricting commission in Utah to prevent gerrymandering. Moore was one of the original signatories on the application to put Proposition 4 on the ballot, which would later be passed as an anti-gerrymandering law. This law became the legal basis for a judge's recent decision to throw out Utah's congressional map and redraw the lines before next year's midterm elections. But Moore said what started as a bipartisan push to ensure fair maps has now strayed from its original mission, and he said it has led to reverse gerrymandering in a deep red state. We'll get to his actual quote here in a second. I believe that KSL, whoever wrote this article, Cami, is either being obtuse about what Blake Moore said, slightly in the title and some of the words that she's used, or maybe Blake Moore is actually the one being obtuse or just completely ignorant of what's going on in Utah. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go back in history first. Better Boundaries, right? Let's give some context. If you haven't seen my extra videos, I'll get into the history. If you have, apologize, but I'll try to keep it quick. In 2017, there was a push for better boundaries. Looks like Blake Moore was a part of that. It became Proposition 4, which was placed on the ballot in 2018 and voted by the Utah people and won by a 50.3% vote. So 0.3, that represents a few thousand individuals getting it over for the majority to make this a law. The law was effectively to create a committee of 7 individuals who would create 5 maps based on some rules that were kind of vague and could be left up to some interpretation, which I think is also partially what's causing these issues that we're seeing today. And the legislature, 2 years later, decided to change that law and make their creation of the 5 maps advisory only. It was only designed to, it wasn't designed. They wanted it to only be, here's 5 maps, but the legislature could still just pick their own map and or create their own map as well. Just all the above. The legislature was like, well, you guys can continue to exist, but we're still going to do whatever we want to do. They get sued, and it goes to the court, and the court rules that because there was a 50.3 majority vote, that will trump the 2 years later majority of the legislature changing the law, because it ruined the spirit of the 2018 Proposition 4 law. So the map that we know today, or that has been used today for our current congressional map, has been ruled illegal, or I don't know, is it unconstitutional? I'm not sure exactly how it was ruled, but it was ruled that it can't stand anymore and they need to create new ones. So she ordered, Judge Diana Gibson ordered that a committee be formed, just like in Proposition 4, and that they were to obey the rules of Proposition 4. And the legislature would then have to pick a map of the 5 maps that the committee created. So the committee gets together, they create 5 maps. During that time frame, the legislature they try to make some additional rules or laws around Proposition 4 to kind of control where it goes. And a special session is held, and they pick map C from map A, B, C, D, and E. Judge Diana Gibson waits until 20 minutes before the deadline before the Lieutenant Governor Henderson has to send out to the county clerks the maps so that people can actually run for those positions and to get the voter registration and all that ready so that we can have a good election. And she decides that map C doesn't qualify and that we need to go with map 1. Now, if you remember, I said that the committee created map A, B, C, D, and E, not map 1. So where did map 1 come from? Map 1 was a submission from the plaintiff, which had help from outside the state representation helping to create this map. And it basically guarantees a Democratic seat. Now, I am not here to talk about whether or not there should be a Democratic seat or whether or not there should. That's beyond what I'm trying to get at with this video. My point of this video is Judge Gibson overstepped the Constitution. The Utah Constitution says that the legislature gets to pick a map. And not only that, but she ordered the legislator to follow the process of the original Proposition 4. They created 5 maps. They chose map C. And she says, I don't like map C or any of the maps. And I'm going to go with a map that no one created according to my orders. that to me is just a clear violation of judicial duty, and it is a clear act of judicial activism. And of course, I've been hearing a lot of individuals on the left on X and here in Utah talking about how this is so great and it's a justice to see this happen, and it's so awesome that we got our Democratic seat. And again, look, like, I don't mind the applauding that you got a seat. Good for you. You worked hard. Again, if you want to gerrymander and get a seat, good for you. The problem is the judge clearly went against the Utah Constitution and her own orders. I don't understand how this can stand. And to make it worse, the legislature of Utah has not appealed, and it looks like they're not impeaching her, even though there were threats to do so. I'm sorry, I wanted to see that. So I look at Blake Moore here, who was supposed to have created or helped in the creation of Better Boundaries. And I agree with this quote here of his. It says, it was very much about a process, about a redistricting process in Utah. It was always an advisory commission, an advisory aspect of that work that respected the legislature's constitutional role to redistrict. I slightly disagree with this sentence, but in his sentiments, I agree. The reason I say that KSL and or Blake Moore, I don't know because I didn't interview him, are being obtuse here is he says it's gone beyond original goal. Like implying that the commission itself has gone beyond its goal. And that's kind of what they hint at when I've read this article. And that is like, maybe if that is what he's saying, that's not true. The judge is going beyond the goal. The judge has gone far beyond this goal of Proposition 4. That's the problem. Let's read some more of Moore's quote. The whole effort was advisory, Moore said. It wasn't a constitutional change. And this is where I do disagree with Representative Moore. First and foremost, when you say it was bipartisan, I'm sorry, but the other side of the partisan definitely wanted to make sure that there was a Democratic place in our government. They wanted the congressional map to have a Democrat seat because 33-ish% of Utah is registered as a Democrat or something like that, I think, or at least 33% of them voted for Kamala, I guess. And that's why I disagree. No, their intent always was to control and gerrymander for their side. That was always the intent. Obviously there were going to be some Democrats who wanted this as well, and they weren't actually thinking that. They were like, yeah, let's just have fair ones. But deep down, they were hoping, yes, if we're fair, that means I'll get a seat because there's enough of us that we should have a seat. Okay, that's what they're hearing. To make it fair, they believe they have to have a seat. And I'm not arguing whether or not they should or shouldn't have a seat. Again, I think they should do everything that they can legally and through these norms and processes. The problem is there's clear cheating, and they are not calling out the lie and the cheat. How can a judge say, I'm going to order you to follow Proposition 4, but I'm not going to follow Proposition 4. I'm just going to pick a map that I want to pick. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So, okay, I think just basically from the communication that I've seen, it seems to be very much focused on getting a blue district, which also in itself is also gerrymandering. It's unfortunate that it's gotten to that point. Better Boundaries, that's been in the press a lot lately, Moore said. I feel like they're more focused on outcomes and almost ensuring that there's a Democrat seat. Agreed. There was no legal battle against the state-drawn maps. I've always been bewildered at that, Moore said. It doesn't surprise me that only the congressional maps were challenged, but I think it's highly suspect as to why it was only the congressional maps challenged and not the state level maps challenged. They were drawn at the same time. So Better Boundaries has never been about securing a specific outcome. I mean, it was. I understand, like, again, the specific outcome is like fairness, right? Wasn't that the outcome? Wasn't the expected outcome? Like there's always an expected outcome. And I know I'm playing a little bit of semantics here, but I'm doing that on purpose because these individuals are smart enough to know how to play semantic games. And so I'm going to use the same semantic games against the individuals who get to control our lives. Okay. I understand that headlines tend to focus on outcomes, but if you look at our work, it has been consistent from the start. End partisan gerrymandering, follow the standards voters passed, make sure no party has unilateral control over the process. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna now change slightly here. What is wrong with gerrymandering? Can anyone actually tell me? Because I've heard a lot of arguments and I don't think any of them make sense. one of the things that I've heard, which definitely doesn't make sense, and I'm only going to get into one of the arguments, is that the founders didn't understand that gerrymandering would become a problem, or maybe they didn't know what gerrymandering was, and they didn't foresee computers and the speed and predictability that they would have in being able to control things. And I'll agree, they were not aware that computers were going to exist and that we would be able to calculate thousands of maps within seconds to determine the best map and find out which map you might want that would benefit you. But here's the deal. They knew full well about gerrymandering. It had already been going on. It has always gone on. There has always been gerrymandering in the world. People form groups. Group leaders try to gain control, and they're going to do everything that they can to make sure that they stay in control. Why? Because corrupt individuals seek out power, and power tends to corrupt. And absolute power, I just forgot the saying. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Is that what it is? I just messed that up, I think. My point is, power does encourage corrupt individuals to seek it out, because corrupt individuals want power. They want control because they are corrupt. And so the founders were trying to find a way to stop corruption. How can we stop people from wanting to control other individuals? So they came up with the 10 Amendments. And our 10 Amendments, people don't understand that they've always been different. Like, we've never truly respected the idea of the First Amendment, and it's changed. When it was originally written down, there were laws against profanity and obscenity. You weren't allowed to take the Lord's name in vain or swear. And up until like the 70s, pornography was considered obscene, and now it's considered free speech. And so things have changed. And as me as an individual, I consider myself conservative, and I have to continually ask myself, what is it that I'm trying to conserve? Because do I want to conserve and go back to the 1800s, late 1700s, and conserve what they originally wrote down? And I'm going to say, actually, yes, I think we should just go back and start fresh. I think what they should have done is baked into the Constitution that every 100 years or so, or maybe 80 years or something, Constitution, just everything is erased and you got to start over. I think that would be exciting to see. Yeah, I think that'd be very exciting, because the problem is corruption will continue to build and build and build, and at some point it gets to the point where it's basically impossible to remove it. And the founders knew this. All of the republics that they had witnessed before this time, that they had access to and information of, either were conquered by an exterior force because they were too small, or they basically bifurcated, or there was some type of secession. And guess what? The United States has already gone through this once, right? In the 1800s, there was secession. A lot of people like to say it was over slavery, and though slavery was a very big part of it, and I'm not denying that, there was a lot of other reasons. A lot of the states were like, no, we're states. We are sovereign. You can't tell us what to do. You don't have as much control as you think you have, the federal government. And the federal government said, no, we're going to win, and we're going to take you over. And a lot of people see that as very heroic, and we kept the Union alive. And I see it from a more neutral lens. I'm not saying it was good. I'm not even saying it's bad. The problem is everyone assumes it's good because of the slavery aspect. But just because there was a good fight doesn't mean bad things didn't happen. I think most people can agree with me there. And so I bring that up because our founders knew. They knew about gerrymandering. They knew about bifurcation. They knew about entrenched bureaucracy. They knew about entrenched corruptness. And they were trying to do their best to limit it. They wanted to just stop all of it. And so they created checks and balances. They created a legislature that could have, legislation with senates and representatives to help balance the control of a sovereign state and its people. And we've given that up. The state doesn't pick their senators anymore. They're voted on by the people. So we gave that one up. The founders set it up originally that, like the states, I guess, because it's not really on the constitutional basis, although the Constitution has eroded this, that states used to decide who could vote. And it used to be more towards like property ownership. You had to participate in some civic way, right? Fire duty. You had to be willing to be drafted for wars. You had to participate in like jury duty and all this stuff. And a lot of that has actually been removed from the general populace. Like now, the only thing we complain about civic duty wise is jury duty. Like there is a draft, but we have a standing army, which is another thing that the founders didn't want, a standing army. They wanted the executive power to be able to have ultimate power when it came to war because they've seen other republics fail because there wasn't a strong enough executive body to take care of immediate issues because legislation moves slow, which is part of the design. They'd seen courts overrule systems and take complete control, so they put checks and balances on them. And so now we created this 3 branches of government. We created the Constitution, or the founders did, and they tried to stop and help to control for corruption as much as they could. But I think ultimately everyone is aware that with gerrymandering, all of this that comes is there's going to be a bifurcation or some type of separation into factions. It always happens, and it's happening now. And I worry that in our hubris, that we are too naive to understand that maybe gerrymandering has some good to it. Everyone just assumes it's bad because we tend to take it from the look of the minority, which is understandable. When you're a minority and you feel picked on, you want to have your freedoms. And that's really, for me, where it comes down to is we have lost in America our sense of freedom. Freedom has been eroded at every turn. And the areas that freedom has been increased, quote unquote, is for degeneracy. Like most of the freedom we have is because people just want to do degenerate things. And having freedom is choosing virtue. And the best example of this is drugs. Okay. Yeah, maybe you have the freedom to be able to do drugs, but when you do drugs, you lose the freedom to not do them. And so it is in choosing virtue that we are actually granted freedom. Freedom comes from virtue and doing virtuous things. Now, the real question is there are some things that the left and right believe are virtuous that the other side sees as not virtuous. And that's where, as a pluralistic society, we need to find a way to come together so we can live together. So that there's a way for us to exist without hating each other and forcing our wills down the other person. Because again, I do ultimately want freedom. This is where I do tend to agree with libertarians, but I also think that libertarians just take it too far because again, they tend to push for degeneracy and graph go up. And that frustrates me because I think that as a country, we're better off if we were poor and had good moral standing. And we lack that as a country. We lack that as a state. And I mean that more so as in our governing bodies, but also our people. We're seeing that even in our people. There are so many things that we've just given up. And I guess to round it off real quick, there's this quote here from Cami, who wrote this article at the beginning. He was inspired by Ronald Reagan's support to establish commissions to draw states' congressional boundaries. And the reason I want to go back to that is I think Republicans for too long have turned to Ronald Reagan for some reason for stuff that he's done. It's like, let's replicate him. He was such a great president. And to be honest, I don't think he was. Like, he was very much a moderate individual, which to be honest is exactly what Trump is. Like, to me, it's funny because the Republicans act like they win when we vote for people like Ronald Reagan or Donald Trump. And it's like, well, I mean, Donald Trump's the best clear example. He was a Democrat. Almost all of his life, he grew up as a Democrat, and he became very moderate. And he was like, I'm going to run as a Republican because I think I have a chance of winning in the Republican Party as a moderate. He brings on Tulsi Gabbard and RFK, and they're Democrats. And I'm not even necessarily against that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I actually have a lot of respect for these individuals, and I think they're doing really good work. I don't agree with everything that they say, but I agree with a lot of it. And regardless, president is the first net positive president of my lifetime. I haven't liked any of them in my past. So I look at what's happening, and Republicans tend to win by accepting the other side. Regression happens. And then it's like, what are we actually trying to conserve? Because from my perspective, the only time we win is when we don't conserve things. I don't know. Now, to be fair, I think Trump actually is conserving. He's conserving life from, 20 years ago. It kind of feels like a little bit. And some things, like, again, this is my point. When it comes to conserving, it's a hodgepodge, right? Everyone accepts something that they feel is worth their value, and they're like, I want to conserve that. But we don't actually know. I don't think that the Republicans have ever actually sat down and said, what is it that we are collectively trying to conserve? Because we could say we're trying to conserve the First Amendment, but are you trying to conserve it based on today's standards? Are you trying to base it on 1950 standards, or, you know, the original 1700 standards? Because again, in the 1700s, obscenity laws and profanity laws, you know, pornography wasn't allowed, if that matters to you. And so here we are, allowing for more and more degenerate things in the call for freedom. And I think our founders were very aware of what freedom actually means. Freedom is virtue, and it's doing virtuous things, which is why there were laws. And on the other end, they knew gerrymandering was going to be a thing, and maybe we shouldn't be so quick to say gerrymandering is bad. I think we actually need to have the conversation. Like, why is it bad? Why are there pros and cons? Why didn't the founders put any laws when they were so aware of the gerrymandering issue? So getting back to Ronald Reagan, amnesty for 3 million undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants. No fault divorce. That's a huge loss for the Republican Party. Abortion access. He's the one who allowed it in California and opened the door for the rest of the United States. Gun control. He was very much for restricting certain firearms. He believed that assault weapons is a real thing, which I still don't have a definition of what an assault weapon is. And you know, there's a few other things that he did, and there's so many Republicans I talk to who look to him as like this like God tier Republican, and I'm like, I look at him and I'm like, I don't think he did anything that was great for the Republican Party. Like, if anything, he just converted the Republican Party more into Democrats. And you kind of see this because you have the boomer generation as a whole. They tend to have a very similar worldview to each other, even though they have differing perspectives. You got Democrats and Republicans. They do see the world through a similar lens, at the very least. And as we go down through the generations, we just become more and more bifurcated. And that's kind of what scares me. We see it with Gen Z, that it's like a large majority of the men are consider themselves on the Republican side. And it sounds like that might be changing because of comments from Trump. And the women tend to be a little bit more on the left side. But even still, the men that are on the left and the women that are on the right, like, they still differ in their views. Their worldviews are becoming so distinct and different. And we as a people need to find a way for us to live together without trampling on each other's rights, which means freedom. But again, I just made the argument that true freedom is about virtue. And so it's like, well, where do we draw the line on what virtue is? And I would rather that our conversations turn to that instead of just this infinite fighting between the left and the right. Again, the left and the right populists believe that the population left and right is like 70 to 80% want voter ID laws, and yet that's not happening on the congressional level. So I don't know. Things are just not making sense to me, and I would like to find a way for us to come together and not step on each other's freedoms. Like, why can't we let's all just agree, let's revoke the federal government's control. Let's stop trying to force our control in the federal government to control other people. And at the very least, let the state do it. If a state wants to, with the minimal amount of controls from the federal government, let the states do it, and let's see what happens. So again, my point is we got to save the state before we can save the country, because even the states are bifurcating, and they're trying to control the federal government to benefit them. And I think that's just going to come back and hurt us all. So I'll leave it there. If you disagree with anything I said, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Let me know. You can find me on X at Reese J. Crockett. You go ahead and argue with me. Let me know I'm wrong. I tend to do a lot of reposting and sometimes comment, and I'll try to get more better at commenting. I've never really been on X or a social media guy, so it's a new skill I'm trying to learn. Go ahead and share this video if you like what I'm doing. Share this video with everybody you know. Let them know that, like, let's form a coalition. Let's try to change Utah. Let's try to do it together. Let me know what's going on in your local areas. I would love to be able to cover news of local areas of corruption if we can find it. I'll try to find it myself as well. And if you disagree with me, share my video. Share it with your neighbor and let them know, or your friend, and just take a good laugh at me. Talk with your friend and be like, look at this idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It would help out the channel. So like, subscribe, and until next time.